The World Wide Web. A place where people are able to spread their creativity, opinions and ideas. Many people consider this a good thing. But what if we were to tell you about the truly strange, nonsensical and the bizarre, ideas and videos that usually fly under the radar? Here, two friends are tasked with finding such things, gathering data, and presenting their findings to one another, in an attempt to understand, what is this? Hello, and welcome to What Is It? I mean, this, what is this? I believe I gave you some homework, Harry.
Ah, yes. What is this? What is this? I've been sent away. I've been dispatched by the Whimsy Cast, and today I've cumulatively collected all my thoughts about a certain special somebody. Rather than being an item, I'm going to talk about a rather interesting bloke. Who's that Pokemon? It's Charles Manson!
Fuck's sake. Yeah, well, what have you got to tell me about Charles Manson? Like I said, I haven't really heard much about him apart from him killing some people.
Oh, yeah. That's what he did. He did it quite well, but he got caught, so depending on how well you want to say he did it, sort of varies on your opinion. But Manson here, the little cracker himself, had quite an interesting life. He grew up as a only child. His dad ran away and left his mum. His mum raised him, but then she got fed up of him and sent him away to Catholic school. Whilst at Catholic school, he was described as being quite rowdy and annoying, and he used to get up to quite a lot of trouble. He finished Catholic school. I mean, he got into trouble. He got into legal trouble. He was arrested for stealing, so he was sent to prison. But then he came out of prison and he got into trouble again.
What for? What for? Tell me.
For pimping out women.
For fuck's sake.
So yeah, he was pimping out a lass.
How'd you get into that?
I don't know. He was basically very persuasive. He got her interested in him, and then he basically was using her and pimping her out. Which is a bit unusual considering his first time he was sent to prison, he was told off because he was holding a man to knife point for homosexual acts. So yeah, he's gone from men to women.
Well, yeah, you got to experiment at some point, I guess.
And then in his little bout in prison, it was a summer of love.
Ooh.
And during the summer of love, you had this very interesting art movement. You had a cultural movement driven by kids, and the Fool there, sorry, they really drove the movement by taking on Indian teachings and proverbs, took on a lot of artistic style, and they pumped into the popular media of the time. So for example, Cream, their art style, their use of color, the music, sound, it was all very psychedelic and heavy.
Ah.
Times were groovy, baby.
Oh,
and Big Boy Manson himself was taking on these Indian teachings. Whilst he was in prison,
whoa,
he got heavily into the Beatles. And when I say heavily into the Beatles, I mean he seriously loved the Beatles. He loved music. His dream was to become quite a successful musician, popular person. That sort of gig. At Martyrs in prison, he got heavily into the Bible. He started reading the Bible. He started reading Scientology. He got really into theology and philosophy.
How do you mix the Bible and Scientology?
Don't know, baby. I really don't know. But he got really into it, and he basically liked the idea of essentially he himself being this higher form of being, because of this idea that he was an only child, he didn't really belong, and he basically saw the world as his little playground. And he learned quite a lot of this from reading a novel called A Stranger in a Strange Land, which is about a fella from Mars leaving Mars and coming back to Earth. And his impact of coming back to Earth essentially shook the status quo. So Manson himself sort of thought of himself as a stranger in a strange land.
So it's a bit like modern age, young teenage girls, whenever, say, a BLM riot happens, and they're all just like, no, I know what this is. This is about me.
I'm going to hijack this movement and turn it into myself, my own self-validation and gratification.
Yeah, so Manson. Oh my god, he appropriated religion.
Yeah, and to him, his religion, instead of being the Beatles, even though the
The
Beatles are
Beatles.
his, like, his icons, were these chaps. Jesus, Ron L. Hubbard, Joseph Smith, the father of Mormonism,
Oh god.
and this little fella with the spectacles is Dale Carnegie, who wrote a book about persuasion and getting people to like you, and it became one of Charles Manson's favorite books.
You know,
You can sort of see this all sort of compiling together now, can't you? An idea of
yeah,
a Jesus-like figure.
it's a cooking pot of craziness. That's what it is.
Oh yeah.
Ah,
So this idea of Manson being sort of in the middle of this cultural zeitgeist, he saw himself as being a bit of a Jesus character, and he essentially saw the people around him, these like fellows or his family, as being his main disciples. He essentially believed that he was a reincarnation of Christ and his closest like follower membership. So these women who he was becoming involved with, he sort of convinced were his disciples and was saying that they were meant to be close to him. And like Jesus, he called the establishment the Romans because he saw the establishment as being opposed to him and wanting to kill him.
too brute.
So he essentially had Love Guru here, sat there in San Francisco, sort of basking in his own self importance. The fella got out of prison. These women that he was talking to outside of prison and within prison, who were all sort of released in similar points, were sort of gathered around Manson, and he became the central guru-like figure. He'd taken on all his like teachings, his ideas, all this sort of stuff, and modeled himself as a guru. He was essentially supplying these ladies with drugs and sex, and he was
that
making
is
them
a
become very, very addicted to his like
it,
company.
it's very persuasive when you combine the two.
Oh yeah. Especially if you're charming like Mike Myers or Charles Manson was.
Oh, yeah, I think he was very charming. Mike Myers, that
Oh
is.
yeah. But like any good wacko who centralist, sort of like self-importantist person, he came up with his own theories. And Manson's own theory he dubbed Helter Skelter.
Like the
Ooh.
why did he call it Helter Skelter? Why not something like, I don't know, the Alan Parsons Project or something?
So you remember the Beatles?
Who doesn't remember the Beatles? I love uh,
John Paul.
yeah,
John Paul the second.
I like John Paul. I like the that guy from Liam Gallagher. He's a good one from the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
he's a
George Parasol.
George Parasol.
Paul Machamley.
Yeah.
But yeah, Helter Skelter, it came out in 1968 and it was a Beatles song on the White Album. The White Album was seen as like a bit of a hippie do album by the Beatles, and Manson, being the ever big Beatle maniac himself, he took the song's idea of coming down fast and going down the ride and seeing the ride coming to an end. However, his ride in his head was essentially a big race war. His concept of a race war, however, was blacks versus whites in
That's
America.
that's usually how a race war goes.
And because Manson, being the sort of racist he is, he theorized that black people would kill all the white people, except Manson and his family would be spared, as they, being the reincarnation of Jesus and the disciples, will be looked to as being new masters, as in Manson's ideas, he thought that black people were incapable of leading themselves and they needed a master.
So wait a second. But here's my point. So for the black people of America to rise up and overthrow the white people, surely they would need to be organized and have a leader anyway to do that. So how could someone incapable, or a group of people that he considered incapable of leading themselves, rise up and overthrow, like, the majority?
I'm not too sure, however, quite a large portion of it comes back to the Black Panther movement and the civil rights movement, because Manson saw it as being like a decentralized organization.
Right. Okay. Manson sounds a bit fucking stupid, but all right. Well, continue.
So this idea of a race war, the world would come to an end, and civilization as we know it would essentially be gone, except for Manson and his peers, these disciples who had become higher forms of being in this supposed society. So yeah, that's his doomsday cult and doomsday idea. And Manson being the ever expansionist, he took this idea and he rolled with it and he thought, how can I get this groovy message out there of racism and apocalypse essentially by going to the cultural heartland of the Summer of Love in
Ah,
California.
yeah. That's where it all goes down.
Manson picked up his boots, moved down south. There he is, a little chap.
I keep to. I'm gonna say it. Controversial opinion. I think Manson it was quite a handsome guy. I call him Manson the Handsome.
I call him Chris Hansen. I'm here for booty.
Who's the fellow under him? He looks a bit like Manson.
This fella, he is the drummer of the Beach Boys.
Ah, yeah, because of course the Beach
Ooh.
Boys were well known to be part of a cult.
Yes,
They
sir.
had a cult. They literally had a cult following.
Yeah, because of this idea of California sound and the shaping of the '60s and the Summer of Love, the Beach Boys were one of the central bands to all of this. And the drummer, Dennis Wilson here, he met Manson because Dennis was driving through Santa Monica and he came across these two very attractive ladies. And
Hmm.
Dennis basically decided, oh, I'm going to give these lasses a ride. And he took them back to his place.
Yeah.
And then the next morning or so, this weirdo turned up and started talking to him. And this dude was Charles Manson.
How did he track him down?
I know. He just turned up and he started talking to Dennis there. And Dennis was like, oh, this dude's weird. I kind of like him. So the two sort of created like a bit of a friendship.
As you
And
do.
Dennis introduced him to the rest of the Beach Boys. And the Beach Boys and Manson became friends. And Manson also became friends with this fella over here.
Got a nice head of hair on him. Who is it?
Yeah, he's quite a lovely looking fella, but I wouldn't necessarily trust him around Manson. He was Melch, but Melcher was basically one of the producers for the Beatles, and he became friends with Manson. And through this friendship, they started like trying to write music, and Manson was sort of dabbling in and out of this sort of scene.
Okay. Hmm. I like how, just as a sidetrack, Manson looks like Daniel Avidan from, what was that, Ninja Sex Party?
Yeah, a bit, yeah. But Melcher there and Dennis worked with Manson to make this track called "Never Learn Not to Love," and Manson basically relinquished all the writing like rights behind it because he essentially wanted to be paid in like what was it like 100 grand's worth of stuff. Didn't actually want paying properly. He just wanted like basically just money for drugs. But Manson continued to cast his net further out, and he met these two fellas.
It's the lead singer from Milky Chance.
Tex Watson and Bobby Bosal, and they were both like former actors, musicians, and they were like on the sort of periphery of the scene in terms of like the acting world. So they had their own connections. They were both heavily into drug use, and yeah, they became friends with Charles through this. And Manson sort of wandering, so he also came across this chap here, Roman Polanski, the director producer.
Oh, yeah.
So Charles Manson sort of fell out with Melcher and the Beach Boys because Manson was seen as being a bit unpredictable. The weird thing is, up until their falling out, they were happily taking drugs together, hanging out. The members of the Beach Boys and Dennis there were mixing with Manson's like family, and they're all sort of taking drugs together, sleeping together, exchanging, staying at each other's places, whatever. However, this certain event happened where Manson shot a black fella with an M16, and the lead singer of the Beach Boys witnessed it, and he basically
What?
became very disturbed by it. Yeah, uh,
No, I haven't heard any songs about this from the Beach Boys.
nah, and the Beach Boys were like, "Okay, this is getting a bit weird," and
Oh yeah, yeah.
Dennis,
That's the reasonable thing to say after seeing a poor guy getting shot. It's like this is a bit weird. I'm gonna bounce.
Yeah, but it really freaked him out. And Dennis, he even though he called Manson affectionately like the Wizard and spoke about him in the Rolling Stone magazine and said, "Oh, I know this guru called Charles Manson and all this sort of shit." He himself became a bit distant from Manson to the point where he moved away. He changed flats. He changed addresses. He got up and left.
Okay.
And Manson found this out, and he sent a bullet to Dennis's house, essentially as like a bit of a threat towards him.
Okay, now.
So Dennis, being Dennis, took off. He was really scared, freaked him out.
Dennis Rodman.
Melcher did the same. He basically went, I'm not happy with this. I'm leaving. And Charles Manson, in his attempt to track down Melcher and to try and further pursue his career as like a music writer producer, went looking for his address. And who moved in? Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. They took up residence pretty nearby to where Melcher used to live. And Manson, being Manson, didn't really go about it in the orthodox way. He sort of just wandered about the estate, just randomly walking around and just calling out, "Oh, do you know where this fella lives?" And everyone was like, "Who are you on about?" Polanski didn't have a clue. Tried to talk to Manson. Tate turned up. Manson took off. He didn't even say a word to her. But he was somewhat aware of who Polanski was, but there was a bit of bad blood between them.
Hmm.
Manson took off. He wasn't really seen for quite a while. Ideally, in Manson's world, this is me theorizing now, it
Oh.
probably would have turned out quite well. He would have connected with Polanski, probably would have reconnected with Melcher there, would have pursued a musical career, and he would have become this like icon centralist character within the California sound. So why didn't that happen? Why didn't he become this like mega superstar? This is the thing he was aiming for. He really wanted to be the center of everything. It just didn't quite turn out. So you had Manson here, and you remember Bobby and Tex, little druggy weirdos? Yeah, they continued to like sell drugs and stuff, but it reached a point where there was quite a lot of bad blood between them and a couple of people. And the Manson family were becoming involved in killing people. And the Beach Boys were aware of this. Some of the people close to Manson were aware of this. However, it then expanded further and they became recognized for it.
That's never a good sign.
So Manson and the family's killings had expanded further. Manson, even though he didn't actually carry out these killings,
who
he was involved in them.
who stretched the guy's face below what was her name? Shannon Tate?
His face isn't stretched, that's literally just his mugshot.
Okay.
That's the way he looks. Yeah, I didn't
Just-
even crop the image or anything, it just came up like that. I was like, yeah, that's fine.
I thought someone just tugged on like top and bottom of his face.
Just stretched him out, it looks like a pen nib.
Yeah. Ugh.
But yeah, as everyone knows, the family went round, killed these people. In the case of Hinman there on the bottom, Manson kidnapped him. They kept him for 2 days to try and extort money out of him, but they couldn't get any out of him, so then they just killed him.
Yeah, but how would you like? This is the '60s, so how there was there any ATMs? I doubt there were.
No, but it's more the idea that there was like money. He could have gone to the bank, promised them, given it to them. However, he basically claimed that he didn't have any money, so he didn't pay him. Manson got cross and shot him.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like Manson.
Yeah, but in the case of the Tate murders and the LaBianca murders, yeah, Manson stayed in the car. Tex and Bobby were with him. They went off with the female members of the family, and they went in, killed him. Why
Yeah.
didn't the police pursue Manson earlier? Well, they did. They sort of heard about this weirdo on this ranch. They went in, found all these guns on the property, and they arrested him. However, him and his family were only held for like the space of a day at the longest, and they were let go. This wasn't actually an arrest made in connection to these murders. It was basically a disturbance warning where Manson had essentially been like, put onto the police radar for being a weirdo and the police checked him out. However, Manson himself had realized that this was very close to him, so he decided to up sticks and ditch. He was going. The police, however, when they were at the ranch, came across Helter Skelter and this idea of Helter Skelter, and the police were like, this is weird. This is very similar to these killings. And the police started collecting evidence together to do with the killings because a series of messages had been painted on the walls of the Tate house, Polanski's house, and the LaBianca's house. The stuntman Hinman's house, he had some sort of like weird message, and the fellow who'd been kidnapped and held hostage, they found his body. and they're all roughly connected to the same area, and the same blood messages were sort of found across them to do with pigs. So political piggy, or pig, and all this sort of stuff were left written in blood on the walls. But the most damning evidence were the words "Helter Skelter" written in blood on one of the walls. And the police connected the dots and realised Helter Skelter, this is to do with this weirdo Manson. We need to get him. By this
Rightfully
point,
so.
Manson and the family had taken off.
Oh wait, so they went to the ranch again,
Yeah,
and then they found all this evidence, and then it was like, ah, fuck.
couldn't find him. The police were like, yeah, this is too many coincidences. This all lines up. We need to pursue him. So they went to go and track down Manson, and they found Manson. They found the key family members, and they arrested them. Funnily enough, Manson was hiding in a sink basin's cupboard. He was just hiding in his little cupboard away from the police, and the police cracked it open. They were like, "What?" So they found this old bloke hiding in there. The evidence was racked against him. The helter skelter, the whole idea then became public, and the dots were connected up.
I'm assuming Charles Manson was quite a tall fella. Yeah, I'm not
Um,
expecting him to be like 4'2".
yeah, he's not a dwarf.
Dwarf? No, he's not a dwarf.
It's not a weird.
No, so that must have been a big sink.
Yeah, I don't actually know how tall Manson was. I think, probably thinking about it, he's probably like average height, so what, 5'8"?
Yeah, he's about my size.
Yeah.
He's known as a manlet.
Big Manson, there we go.
Big Manson, yeah. Big Dog Manson. Anyway,
Yeah.
carry on.
Yeah, the court took Manson to court. He was tried. The family members were tried, and they were basically trying to condemn the fella for essentially like conspiring murder and for killing the stuntman. Manson's case was essentially, oh, I didn't kill Tate, I didn't kill the little Blancas, I didn't actually kill any of these people. However, the court basically said, well, you did kill one of them, so that's one case of manslaughter, and then the rest of them you'd conspired to kill. So even though the family members had carried out the killings and they were all convicted for death sentence, Manson was convicted for death sentence as well for conspiracy. However, his court case was really, really weird. He showed up to court and he essentially started speaking in gibberish. He was speaking in like tongues. He was speaking, like hurdy-gurdy language, and things got progressively weirder.
Hurdy-gurdy.
Oh yeah, it got even weirder because he turned up to one of the case like hearings and he carved like an X on his forehead. And the family members who'd been arrested and the ones who weren't arrested had all started with like these X's on their foreheads as well.
Seems like collusion.
Oh yeah. And whilst continuously speaking in gibberish, like the members of his family being tried, they're all there chanting Latin in the middle of this like courtroom. And Manson got really fucked off with the judge at one point, and he jumped the table and he tried to jump the judge, like to go and attack him, and he had to be wrestled and carried out. After that point, the judge carried a gun to every single case, to all the hearings and stuff he had with Manson. So the judge was literally carrying a piece in case Manson tried to jump him again.
You can't blame the fella, can you?
No. But then Manson was basically realised he was backed up in a corner. There's no way out, so then he just played into it. He shaved his head. He cut his beard into like a fork. He was calling himself like the devil. He called himself like the evilest man and all this sort of stuff. Running around saying, I'm evil, I'm twisted, I'm all this, I'm goofy, whatever. And yeah, the court basically just decided, yeah, you're a wacko.
Yeah.
You're going to like the mental institute. You're going to stay there, and you're going to be killed by lethal injection.
That's his defense. I'm goofy. I'm wacky. Like, oh, we better kill this guy.
Yeah, he was just a goofy goober. He was doing too much. He was doing too many bad things. So instead of becoming the it girl, the little centralist, with the movement like, ooh,
Yeah.
it's all about me. It's more like Orange is the New Black. He became the main bitch in prison. All the inmates avoided him. They're all like, oh God, stay away from him. He's evil. And he got this reputation of being a complete weirdo. And all the prisoners would stay away from him. He was so unpredictable. He's so volatile. They kept him perpetually in like the mental area of a prison.
What's Sharon Osbourne doing in prison?
I know, dude. Probably looking for the beers that Ozzy lost. But yeah, Everything's not good though. It's far from good. Manson, even though he's tried and put on the death sentence being carried out was then stopped. It was made illegal in the state of California. So Manson's case was eventually changed from being a death sentence to being life incarcerated. But in the state's like wisdom, they were like, "Oh, but this is quite good punishment though, because he'll have to live knowing what he had done."
Yeah,
However, Manson had no remorse. He had zero sense of remorse for any of it. He
yeah.
didn't care.
I had to punish someone
In
that doesn't
Manson's
care.
eyes, yeah, in Manson's eyes, he was just, he was like, "Oh, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong." And he basically was saying that the state was evil and that the people were evil for imprisoning him. And he thought that was more wrong than him actually carrying out the killings. He didn't acknowledge it. He didn't care. So you essentially had this weirdo on a prison sentence. However, he did have a chance for parole, though. So people did actually inquire into it on 12 occasions throughout his life. And all 12 occasions, they were rejected.
Yeah, well, rightfully so.
But during his time in prison, he then went around essentially trying to paint a new image for himself because he'd become known for being highly manipulative and essentially being this manipulator of women, of a family, and all this sort of stuff. He
Yeah.
essentially tried to rebrand himself as being a moron.
How to manipulate women in prison. So I've heard.
Yeah. But he then went around saying, "Yeah, I was too stupid to come up with this idea of killing these people." And to try and put this forward, this fella, Noel Emmons, he became friends with Charles Manson, and he then published this book about Charles Manson, where he said, "Yeah, I was friends with Manson. Manson told me about the murders and all this sort of stuff." But Emmons was a bit different, and he went to all the networks, released a book, and he said, "Yeah, Manson's an idiot. He's an imbecile. He was incapable of doing these killings." And the news networks then came around to interview Manson. Most of them wouldn't be issued because Manson was too disturbing for most of the American population, and what was recorded was eventually clipped. He was that deranged he started dancing or speaking in gibberish or just going about being whimsical in these interviews to the
Whimsical.
point where the interviewers were like, we can't get an actual answer out of this fella. And Manson was so volatile that yeah, he had to be kept in chains or removed eventually. And interviews with him in prison were stopped. They weren't allowed to interview him anymore. This idea of Manson being deranged didn't go far. It didn't really help his parole. The book was heavily criticized, and Manson was essentially just left to rot in jail.
Well,
But
yeah, I don't think they would release someone acting like that, would you?
nah. So during his time in prison, he met this fella, Henry Rollins. Henry Rollins came into prison, even though he was famous for it later on. He would be a part of Black Flag, quite a big punk band in the sort of like California area. He took off with that. But before Black Flag, Henry Rollins went in and recorded like an album with Charles Manson. Because Charles
How?
Manson, during his like prison career, was just continuously writing music and trying to release it. Manson's material from the 1960s was written and somewhat released as like bootlegs and unofficial releases, and like several people covered them. But in prison, Manson was allowed to have like a guitar in the psychiatric ward. Rollins was allowed to visit him because he wasn't convicted of anything, he wasn't done for anything, he wasn't on the police records. So it was essentially just this outside force coming in, visiting Manson, and recording an album. He was just allowed. There isn't really like a how or why. It was just like a case of, Manson was part material. Yeah, he was allowed in. But the weird thing is, only 5 copies of the album were ever made, and 3 of them are owned by Henry Rollins there. The other 2 or 3 I don't quite know.
I bet they're in
They're
private
just there.
collections.
Yeah,
I bet someone bought one of them and they're like, this is going to be like Bitcoin in the future.
yeah. They're just sort of there. And even though Manson's material in the 60s had been released as bootlegs, and then like some of this stuff when he was in prison was released, not the rolling tapes though, but some of his own work, people are like, oh, it's interesting, it's funny, it's weird because this psychopath weirdo made this record or whatever. None of it's particularly good. It's like it's weird. It's like a bit of a weird scenario where it's like people hype it up more than it actually is like credible. And in terms of being a inspiration and whatever, he isn't.
No.
He eventually just died in prison from colon cancer. He was cremated. His ashes were scattered out. That was it. He's gone.
That's the end of Manson.
There's been like some weird takes where people have like said, "Oh, we've got these Charles Manson tapes of records and songs." The verification behind them is a bit weird. You don't know if he actually wrote them or not. He's not live to be asked.
Mm.
Points of contention, they're just sort of there. Another one was this dude came forth and around Manson's death, claiming to be his kid. It's disproven. The DNA didn't match up.
How can you get a DNA sample from ashes?
Don't know.
You have to
I
hunt
think
them
they took it
down.
whilst he was alive.
You have to hunt them down in the breeze.
The main reason why people know about Charles Manson nowadays is either through Netflix, either through like having a weirdo girlfriend who's interested in psychopaths and serial killers, who can
Oh,
make you
yeah.
watch these documentaries, the time,
Yeah.
or these weirdo dudes who are interested in this stuff, or
Like
in the
us.
case of yeah, we're a bit weird.
Thank you, Harry. I've definitely learnt more than I knew. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you've seen, then be sure to like and subscribe. Just remember, every new subscription is another reason for Harry to try and get a new microphone.
Yay!
Yeah, you're basically helping a guy, a desperate man. He needs
Oh, God.
he needs that Shure SM7.